Hidden in the winding alleys of Cairo, the largest city in Africa and the Middle East, a fugitive lived out his final days in plain sight. This was a man responsible for some of the most unspeakable horrors of the Second World War, a man whose hands were stained with the blood of hundreds. His neighbours knew him only as Dr. Tariq Farid Hussein, a tall, quiet man who never missed a prayer at the mosque. Gamal Abdu Ahmed, who lived in the very room once occupied by the fugitive, remembers him vividly. He was like a giant, Abu Ahmed recalls, not very chatty, but always there for prayers. When reporters revealed his true identity decades later, Gamal's reaction was quite calm. "I knew him since I was 17 years old," he shrugged. "It never intrigued me." The place that offered refuge to such a man was the Casa El Medina Hotel, a now crumbling building with stairways clogged by rubbish and time. It was here, under a new name and a new faith, that Arabet Haim, better known as Dr. Death, the Butcher of Mauthausen, found his final hiding place. But who was Arabet Haim? He was not an ordinary doctor. In fact, he had no real medical experience when he entered the concentration camps. Yet, he operated on nearly 300 prisoners, using them as subjects for horrific experiments. One of his signature methods of murder was injecting gasoline directly into the hearts of inmates who had come to him seeking help and operating on people without anesthesia. In the aftermath of the war, you might expect a man like Haim to vanish into obscurity. But, in an almost arrogant defiance, he did neither. He started a family, practiced medicine openly. His name remained in the telephone directory. If anyone had truly wanted to find him, they could have. But when the grip of justice began to tighten around him, he finally ran. His name climbed the list of the Simon Wiesenthal Center's most wanted Nazi war criminals. This is the story of the terrifying Dr. Death.
Welcome to Unveiled History.
Aribert Haim was born in Austria on June 28, 1914, in Bad Reichsgebirge, then part of Austria-Hungary. His beginnings were humble, the son of a policeman and a housewife, growing up in a world that would soon be torn apart by war. From the outside, he had every gift life could offer. Tall, standing nearly at 6'3", handsome, and a world-class athlete, long before we would remember him for far darker reasons. Driven by ambition, Haim pursued his education in Graz, later earning his medical diploma from the University of Vienna in 1940. Even before Germany annexed Austria in 1938, Haim had already joined the Nazi Party. At a time when membership was still illegal in Austria, his loyalty to the regime was unquestionable, and it was just the beginning. In 1940, Haim volunteered for the Waffen-SS, Hitler's elite military force. He was absorbed into the heart of the Third Reich's most feared organisation, the SS, and quickly rose to the rank of Hauptsturmführer, captain, placing him firmly among Hitler's trusted elite. Haim served as a doctor at Buchenwald and Sachsenhausen, two of Germany's most notorious concentration camps. But it was his posting to Mauthausen in October 1941, near Linz, Austria, that would seal his fate. At Mauthausen, Haim worked side by side with SS pharmacist Erich Wasicki, a man as twisted as he was methodical. Together, they carried out experiments so gruesome that survivors would later compare their cruelty to that of Josef Mengele, the Angel of Death, at Auschwitz. They injected various deadly solutions directly into the hearts of Jewish prisoners, testing and observing to see which poison killed the fastest. It was at Mauthausen that he earned the chilling nickname, Dr. Death. In the pages of No Revenge But Justice, famed Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal recounts the horrors he learned firsthand during his own imprisonment. One of the most chilling stories came from a prisoner who once worked as Heim's surgical assistant. When a new transport of prisoners arrived from the Netherlands, Heim selected 2 young men and kindly asked them to volunteer for a small, harmless procedure. They were promised their freedom afterward. Both young men were anaesthetised, but what followed was anything but harmless. Heim dissected them alive, carefully studying their organs, driven by a monstrous curiosity to see for the first time how the stomach of a living person works. Heim had their heads severed and their bodies burned in the camp's crematory. Their skulls were boiled and preserved. One allegedly sat on Heim's desk as a grotesque trophy, while the other was gifted to a colleague. Wiesenthal also tells of a 12-year-old Jewish boy brought to Heim's operating table. The boy, sensing death, began praying aloud, a final, heart-wrenching goodbye to his parents. Heim listened intently, then spoke to the child in a gentle, almost fatherly tone, as though explaining a tonsil operation. He told the boy he had to die because Jews, he said, bore the blame for all of the world's evils. One of Heim's few surviving guinea pigs was Marcelino Bilbao, a 21-year-old Spanish prisoner. For 6 agonizing weeks, Heim injected him with small doses of benzene, watching as Bilbao's body bled from his nose and ears. His urine turned deep red, and finally, his body became paralyzed. Only Heim's departure from Mauthausen in late November saved Bilbao's life. Through meticulous post-war investigations, Simon Wiesenthal concluded that at least 540 people died at Heim's hands, victims of his treatments. Prisoners were routinely poisoned with injections of petrol, phenol, water, or other substances. Injected directly into their hearts to see which killed fastest and cheapest. Organs were removed from living bodies, amputations were performed without anaesthetic. Prisoners' tattooed skin was fashioned into furniture for the camp's commandant quarters. According to survivor Karl Lotter, Heim once treated an 18-year-old prisoner with an inflamed foot, but instead of healing him, Heim anaesthetised him, castrated him, removed a kidney, and decapitated him. Lotter testified that Heim then boiled the flesh off the skull and kept it on his desk as a paperweight, because, as he said, it had perfect teeth. After his short and brutal tenure as a camp physician, Aribert Heim was transferred to the SS hospital in Vienna. There, in a twist almost too surreal to believe, the man who had murdered so many in the camps was now tasked with saving lives. Between 1942 and 1945, Heim served as a physician in the SS Gebirgsjäger Division Nord and later worked at a hospital in Oulu, Finland. By all accounts, Heim built himself an impeccable reputation as a dedicated army doctor. Thanks to his skill, drive and determination, many wounded soldiers survived the brutal battles on the Eastern Front. But no matter how polished his army record became, it could never wash away the atrocities he committed at Mauthausen. As the war neared its inevitable end, Heim must have realised that the world would soon start hunting down war criminals, and so he vanished, slipping away into hiding in Norway as chaos spread across a collapsing Europe. Dr. Death had disappeared. On March 15, 1945, when the world was still suffering from the Second World War's dying roars, Aribert Heim was arrested by American forces. They sent him to a prisoner of war camp in Ludwigsburg, where he would later be forced into back-breaking labour in the Jagsfeld salt mines near Heilbronn from 1947 to 1949. By 1949, Heim was a free man. No obstacle stood in his way as he blended into civilian life, becoming an assistant surgeon at the Civil Hospital of Freiburg, Hessen. That same year, he married a fellow physician. Together they moved to the elegant town of Baden-Baden, where Heim operated a thriving gynecology practice. By 1958, Heim had amassed considerable wealth, buying 24 rental homes in the Berlin suburb of Tiergarten, raking in 6,000 marks a month according to Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal. But prosperity built on horrors cannot last forever. In 1962, a warrant for Heim's arrest was finally issued, based on chilling charges of atrocities committed during the war. Yet, once again, fate, or perhaps careful planning, was on his side. The day before the police came knocking, Heim vanished, tipped off by an unknown source. Since that day, he became a phantom, a fugitive whose trail would grow ever colder. Attempts to extract information from his family were fruitless. Even efforts to pin him down via tax records were masterfully blocked by Steinecker, a move so brazen Wiesenthal filed charges against him in 1979, accusing him of obstruction of prosecution. The charges, however, were dismissed. But on June 13, 1979, a hearing before the Berlin Denazification Court declared Heim guilty of all charges, including premeditated murder. A 510,000 mark fine was levied against him, secured by a mortgage on his Berlin properties. His money flow was cut off. Still, Heim's whereabouts remained unknown. Der Spiegel, the German weekly, pieced together parts of the mystery. Heim had briefly returned to Berlin in 1963, then escaped to Egypt, where he found work as a police physician. By 1967, he had divorced his wife and continued her medical career in southern Germany. Rumours later placed Heim in Asunción, Paraguay, and even worked as a psychiatrist in Uruguay between 1979 and 1983. Some even whispered that he had slipped quietly into Spain. In July 2007, the Austrian press agency announced a €50,000 reward for his capture. In July 2008, the Simon Wiesenthal Center again chased strong leads in South America. Convinced Heim was hiding in southern Chile or Argentina, their efforts, though, faced legal barriers. German courts restricted surveillance efforts on Heim's former family, citing the need for lawful procedures despite the magnitude of Heim's crimes. Then, on February 4, 2009, ZDF, a German TV, and the New York Times reported that Heim had allegedly died in 1992 in Cairo, Egypt, of intestinal cancer. They presented documents, passports, letters, bank drafts, and medical records. Heim, they said, had converted to Islam, taking the name Tariq Farid Hussein. Even his son confirmed the story. Finally, on September 21, 2012, after decades of hunts, rumours and heartbreak, the State Court of Baden-Baden officially declared Aribert Heim dead, concluding that he had indeed passed away in Egypt in 1992. Still, for many, closure remains elusive, because sometimes, even in death, monsters leave behind only shadows.